If you're in a location where you feel comfortable putting on your camera, I would really appreciate it. Otherwise, I just look at black boxes. And it's so incredibly lonely to just look at black boxes with people's names. Thank you. Hooray. I see some faces. There's humans there. All right. So we decided that I'm not talking to bots. I appreciate it. It means a lot to me. So what are we talking about today? We're talking about ineffective teams. And I'm going to take you through the symptoms of ineffective teams, what makes a team effective, and tactics to make your team more effective. We're going to do some breakouts at the end of the session so you could talk to your peers and talk about some of the things you're working on, what you've learned, and some actions you might want to take. And then as Zarek mentioned, I'm gifting everyone a 25-minute one-on-one coaching session with me after this. The reason why I've asked you to schedule just to reach out by February 17th. So for the rest of my life, people can't come and say, hey, Kathryn, remember you did this CACNY event? I want a coaching session with you. So it doesn't have to happen by February 17th, but the link I'll share that after this is valid through the 17th. All right. Thank you. And Zarek, I noticed there's some folks in the waiting room. If you don't mind bringing them in, I'd appreciate that. All right. So who am I and why am I talking to you about team effectiveness? Well, I'm an executive and team coach. I lead, as Zarek mentioned, Kathryn Landis Consulting. It's a global coaching and advisory firm. So I'm an executive and team coach. I actually teach leadership courses at NYU. I wrote an article that was published in Harvard Business Review last week, co-wrote around leading Gen Z. And I also am a speaker. I worked and led teams at American Express and ADP, so very big global teams. And I've worked in startups and now run my own startup. So I'm going to throw some numbers out at you. There's an HBR article that came out in fall of 2022. 81% of people say that their team is not operating anywhere near their full potential. 81%. 74% of people say they don't agree that their team is accountable for shared goals. And 71% of people report that their team members aren't committed to elevating one another by offering constructive feedback. And I want to take a moment, if you don't mind writing in the chat or coming off mute, what's your reaction to that? Those are some pretty depressing numbers, in my opinion. What do you think? All right, we have one check on it. Is this in a Zoom world? It is in a Zoom world. We're going to talk about that. Very low, cannot be that bad, but Sanal's not surprised. We have some differences of opinion. Really not surprising. So let's talk about that ineffective. Interesting. I think I have an echo. Nope, not anymore. Okay, so let's talk about that ineffective team, that comedy of errors. That could be at work, it could be at school. Let's admit it, if we remember back to our Kellogg days, we all worked in some pretty bad teams once or twice in a group project. It could be in a sports team. There's all types of teams that you worked on. But let me tell you a story about a team that I had the opportunity to work with. It was a combination of multiple acquisitions just cobbled together, right? There was different company cultures. There were all these SVPs jacking for title and stature. And it was all exasperated by remote work that didn't allow for informal interactions. There was just a lot of mistrust, right? These SVPs, they were afraid to speak up in meetings. There was actually one woman on the team who was afraid to take a day off work because what might happen while she wasn't there in terms of what people might say and people might do. I just felt really awful. I mean, I feel awful just describing this to you. And not only that, there was high employee turnover. For every one person they hired, 3 people were leaving. So I'd like you all to take a moment and think about the worst team you've been a part of. Think about that worst team. And if you don't mind adding in the chat or speaking, coming off mute, what feelings come up for you? How did you show up as a member of that team?
I'm happy to share a team I
Thank
was
you.
part of. So I guess I've been part of a lot of good teams. So it took a little going back in my memory banks, but I had early on after Kellogg worked in a company where the culture of the company was very driven by fear, and there's a ton of like blame placing. And I remember we'd sit in these big meetings. It was a toy company actually, and we sit in these big meetings about next year's toy line, and it was all about everybody. Well, it's marketing's fault, it's production's fault, it's engineering's fault, and if people would actually close the doors so they could scream at each other at different points in time at this company. And I mean, I just remember just feeling like it was hard for me to be my best self. I think it was hard for others to be their best self. People didn't want to put themselves out there for fear of the repercussions. It was a very kind of CYA type of environment.
Ooh, I'm sorry you went through that. What else? Does anyone else have an experience they want to share? See if there's something in the chat. So folks are saying they left the team. That's certainly an option. Can you remember what you were feeling before you left the team?
I think, so I wrote that in the chat. I think it was just that I didn't feel like, going back to what you opened with about a shared vision, there wasn't a vision and goals. And in my personal cases, being asked to do things that weren't going to move the needle, that were really time consuming. It wasn't hitting to my vision of what the organization needed. So I chose to go somewhere else.
Yeah. So now I want you to think about the best team that you're a part of. Think about that team that just really rocking it. What feelings come up for you? How were you able to show up?
I'll continue on, Kathryn, because I really love my shared team right now, and I'm at my work desk, so I have my sticky note of shared goals. It's on a tiny little sticky note. Everyone's very clear about what our goals are. If it's not on this sticky note, then we're not working on it. So it's really clear about what we're trying to achieve, and also we have like top talent, so that helps. But it's very easy to navigate an organization when you have 3 goals that fit on a tiny sticky note.
Absolutely.
I'll offset my bad experience also. I remember, I mean, one of my favorite projects it was years ago, but myself and another were charged with leading a team that was a big initiative for the company we're working at, which at the time was Wyatt. And it was a project that definitely, like, the leadership and everybody in the company really viewed as a priority. It was an opportunity kind of a unique marketplace opportunity that arose. And so it was one of these situations where, because it was a priority, like, we were able to do things that as a company we didn't ever even think we could possibly do, in terms of the pace we moved at, in terms of like the kind of the risk return choices we were willing to make. And it was like really exhilarating, I think, to kind of see what was possible. And for years later, people would go back and be like, we had a kind of a code name for that project. It was called Project Ring. And people would be like, oh, we really need to do another Project Ring here. And it was, so it kind of became a kind of almost like a benchmark for how as the organization could operate when all those stars align, but which in big companies can sometimes be very unusual.
Yeah, and even when you're describing, your face lit up. Matt, go ahead.
So I would say 3 different things. One is really clear, transparent communication. 2 is frequent feedback, not waiting 12 months in between feedback. And that goes up and down. And then in terms of the third characteristic, just having a sense that someone else was using their best intentions and, assuming the best.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Would anyone else like to share? So here's some things that you may have heard from a dysfunctional team. And some cases, it may not be clear who's on the team and who's not on the team. So what do? You need to start understanding the problems, hearing things like no one will step up. We can't have a healthy debate. No one will make a decision. These are all things that you're just observing in terms of symptoms. So when I think about that example with the senior vice presidents, what helped them was actually being reminded of what it's like to actively listen, listening without having a preconceived bias and thinking about what you're going to say without this preconceived mistrust, identifying what's helpful and unhelpful dialogue at work, and what's the barriers to unhelpful dialogue at work. And then also what was most impactful is helping them to be empowered to create change. So every person made a list of what are the things that would change the way they have dialogue at work, and they start discussing.
What is action medicine?
I'm sorry? Okay. I'm going to put that person on mute and continue. And so the team was able to discuss all these previously undiscussable things because they now felt comfortable raising it. So let me show you some research from Harvard. So basically, a team of researchers did some work on team effectiveness, and they found that a team needs 3 criteria. And Amy and Matt and Sonal had spoken a little bit to some of these factors. 1, the team's output needs to meet or exceed the needs of the team's client, right? Doesn't matter if you're in accounting or you're in sales, everyone has clients in an organization. The team needs to be increasingly capable of performing as a unit over time. And the team members' personal learning and growth needs to be fostered by the experiences on the team. Let me know if there are any questions or type them in the chat. I'm going to go into more detail. So what these researchers identified is that there's a set of must-haves and there's a set of enablers that propel and support the must-haves. And the first must-have is a real team. And this, what I mean by a real team, it's not just a collection of people that support the same, that report into the same leader. They actually have to have interdependent work, and there has to be clearly defined members. I have an executive coaching client who's matrixed to 5 separate bosses. I would use the analogy of the movie Office Space, but I've heard sometimes that dates me, and some people don't know that movie. I do teach at NYU, so a lot of my students are Gen Z and younger millennials. So, but if you think about the Bobs and the idea of like who's on the team and who's not, you need to have a defined team, and the work needs to be interconnected. Your team needs to have a compelling purpose. So my friend, I think it was Connie, that has her post-it of these are the 3 priorities. It needs to be, the team's priorities need to be challenging and they need to be meaningful. Notice I'm not saying sexy, right? They don't have to be sexy, but what this means is what is the team's purpose that's going to be making a difference for the organization and its customers with clearly defined success. And we're going to get more into this later. The team also has to have the right people. So different perspectives that can collaborate and limit to 6 or 7 people. I used to work for Ken Chenault at American Express, and he used to say, don't have meetings with more people that can share a pizza, right? So sometimes we have these like tendencies, especially when we want to be inclusive, to invite everybody from every department, and all of a sudden you have a meeting with 40 people and nothing gets done. So really try to keep your teams to 6 or 7 people if you can. So what questions do you have? How does this land on you so far? I see some heads nodding. Some people are smiling. Maybe some people are asleep. I don't know, but that's okay. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Roman, you're smiling. Is that a good or a bad smile? What are you thinking?
No, it's a good smile. It's just, the right people. And it just reminds me that in my last company, there was a real problem in figuring out who was on the team. Tended to bring in lots of people. I was working with an R&D group, and we would bring lots of people, and everyone would chime in, and nobody would challenge each other. So every idea was a good idea, and it ended up getting nowhere.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. What if the team has made for you a hodgepodge of inherited and reorg team members?
Mhm.
That's a good question. So when you say that, Derek, if you don't mind me picking on you, is it the team member was when you say hodgepodge, is it because they don't have the appropriate skill sets? Is it too large of a team? Please tell us more.
Yeah, no, the takeaway was more that the team was kind of thrown together by someone else, and you were expected, like, then you as a leader sort of came in without any idea of how that team was put together. Like it's a sort of decision that was made above you.
Yep.
Typically sometimes happens in reorgs. So
Yes, and I've worked in corporate America where there's lots of reorgs all the time. It felt like you're either preparing for a reorg or you're reacting from a reorg. And I see some folks smiling that might resonate with you. But exactly, it doesn't matter who's on the, so you might not have the power to say this person should be on and off the team, but you can potentially define who's on the team and make it very known, this is the team members. You can make sure the team has a compelling purpose, and I'll talk about how to do that later, right? And you can make sure that it's a real team to the greatest extent that you can make their work interdependent.
What do you do about team members who don't want to be there, even though they're critical to the team product success?
Please tell me more.
Oh, well, teams get assembled for a project, and people get slated, and sometimes they really want to be there, sometimes they don't. It's been my experience, usually because they're so busy with some other stuff. But I've had meetings where I said, well, we're working together to accomplish this. And somebody said, this is your project, not everybody's project. So how do you deal with that?
It's a good question. I'd be curious who put this project together and what were the expectations or agreements. If you go to my, I'm not trying to promote myself, a LinkedIn profile, but there's an article I wrote about agreements. What were the agreements made with everyone that was put on the project in terms of what would they be contributing and what support that they would need in order to contribute? My guess is those people that don't want to participate in the project have a whole bunch of other work to do. And they're like, well, when am I going to fit this in? I'm just making a hypothesis or assumption.
A fair assumption.
Yeah, there needs to be agreements in place. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, when the CEO asks you to be on a team, you don't say no, even if you don't think you belong there. So.
Okay, so then what can you do as a team member in that situation? What I would ask, what agreements you can make with that individual.
Is that a rhetorical question or actual question?
It's more of like a thought-provoking question.
Okay.
What agreements can you make with that for that individual, about what they can do, what they can't do, and what support they might need?
Yeah, in that case, I was very clear. I did negotiate or speak with each individual, especially the people who are saying, well, I don't have time for this, about what they could contribute, what we needed them to contribute. And some of them, were able to do that very clear thing. Others got too busy. And so we ended up working around that. Yep.
And you're hitting on something that I promised I didn't pay Roman to say this, that we're going to talk about on the next slide around supportive context. Let me talk about the team.
Would you pay me? I'd like to be paid. No.
Well, I would like to be paid too. We're all volunteers here at CACNY, if you didn't know that or not. But I'm just kidding. So let's take the supportive context first. And I'm going to actually show an exercise that you can do with your team later on. How do you influence it upwards and outwards to remove roadblocks and provide the resources for the team? And it sounds like in your case, in this instance, you didn't have the right supportive context. You know, you were trying to figure it out and grapple it together, but what was the resources or the people or the obstacles that need to be removed so the project could be successful? And I'll share a little bit more about that after. Also, a big one that I'm going to talk a little bit more about is team norms. So what do you do and what don't you do when working together to achieve these results? This is behavioral and communication norms, and it directly links to that compelling purpose. So if we know what success is, what do we need to do to achieve it? We'll talk more about that. And then also team coaching. This could be the team leader, but you need someone who's paying attention to the processes the team's using and intervene to make better use of resources to help get things done. So what do you do if you don't have one of these elements in place? Well, I see a chat. Oh, thank you, Sarah. Appreciate it. He's shared my LinkedIn post. All right, so let me share some ideas for you. So today, if you think about the must-haves, the enablers that I discussed, I'm going to focus on how do you establish a compelling purpose, and then how do you establish some team norms and a supportive context. Got to pick something. I picked those three because those are the things that I see time and time again that teams trip up on. Okay, so compelling purpose. Here's an exercise that can really work well, and depending upon the sophistication, meaning how long the team's been together, you as a team leader can draft this and then have the team break up into pairs or triads and then tweak the language. Or you can give them this framework and have them go back to their pairs and triads and think about, why does this team exist, right? What are our core priorities? And what does that mean? So how I would do this is I would say, you know, what does this team exist to do? And then have them go back to those like pairs or triads, come back in a larger group, and then align and discuss. Then have them go back and talk about what are the 3 to 5 core offerings or priorities that you have. Come back to the larger group, discuss and align. And then what's the so that, or really the so what makes the difference? I'll stop there. What questions do you have on this? How does this land on you?
I think one of the challenges with something like this is it's tough to get the team to buy into doing this exercise, especially, you know, I came from like a large consulting company where this would very much be normal, to a much smaller company where it's more startup-y kind of mode. And like, I feel like it's not as acknowledged that this types of exercises are helpful.
Mm-hmm. So what would be realistic?
It's a good question. I mean, probably like I'd say probably if you replace, well, kind of the first, probably just the first part. Well, I think the first part is for, I'm in charge of like go-to-market. So ours is usually like a number.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that's kind of like hit our targets. So I think it's probably more of our conversation is more in the buy. Like, I feel like we spend a lot of time in the middle section figuring out what we're going to do, but sometimes I think we kind of lose sight of like, are we focusing on things that are really most impactful?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
Good call out. Chanel said, add, how are we measured? So let me share something else, Nicholas, as like a next step you could also take. And this is when you're developing team norms. So another way, if you know someone's not, you know, I was going to say jiving, but then I was like, maybe that dates me as well. You know, if someone doesn't get the team purpose, then maybe they'll get the idea of team norms, right? What are our must-win, mission-critical things we must accomplish the next 3 to 6 months? You know, I worked in marketing and sales, and I get that, Nicholas. Like, these are the things that we must do in the next 6 months. What they may not realize, and maybe something you can connect with later, is how that connects to the compelling purpose of the team, but at least they can anchor on what they have to achieve. Then get them around and start thinking proactively, what are the challenges that we expect to encounter, right? Think both internally and externally. Have them start brainstorming what those challenges would be, and then come back. I mentioned the triads, the pairs. I find the reason why I suggest that is people a lot of times feel more comfortable in small groups brainstorming things, particularly challenges for the team. And that way people that are, shy or maybe not will share out will feel more comfortable. Then they come back with a broader group and align on what those challenges are. But most things that you see, someone's gone through it before, right? It's just a moment in time. So what are the individual learnings and what are the group learnings or the organizational learnings that we've had that can help overcome these challenges? And the last part is, what are the handful of actions or communication practices that we want to agree to and commit to as a team, and also consider the team leader so we can achieve what success means for us, so we can achieve these 3 to 6 intended results. I see some nodding. What thoughts do you have?
I think just to finish off my kind of experience, I think that box number 1 is like a really concrete way, I think, for at least the people I work with, to ground them in something versus feeling maybe a little too conceptual or consulting-y, if you will. So I really like that idea.
Yeah, but I would encourage them to also take the next step and say, okay, these are our priorities, but what do we anticipate? Let's be proactive about what the challenges might be and how we can come together as a team to overcome them.
Yeah.
So Connie, I see you're back. You're a Post-it person. What do you think about this? How does this live up to the Post-it litmus test?
Exactly. Intended results. There are 3 things that are mission critical. So we're going to do those 3 things and let pretty much everything else go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you can take a step further by helping the team figure out what are those other challenges, what do we know about those, how we can overcome those challenges, and then what do we need to do as a team to commit to in terms of practices. Sounds like one of the practices you have is, if it's not on the Post-it, we're not doing it.
Yeah, I think it's going to, like with number 4, norms and work practices. I know when I inherited this team, the one I'm with now, is that they were working a lot of hours and getting very little and not good results. So how do we work less and be more effective? So we have 3 things in the sticky note we're going to work on. And yes, if you happen to be in hour 7 of your 8-hour workday and you can take on more, great. But if not, oh well. And follow the sticky note.
I had a meeting with a leader yesterday who was going to take over a company, and he actually described his experience with his previous takeover as leading carnage. Carnage. That is like the most graphic word I could think of. Who wants to be a part of the carnage? So he's like, this time around, we're going to think more intelligently. And Connie, that's what we're going to act more intelligently. We're going to work more intelligently. And that sounds like exactly what you all are doing, Connie. No carnage. And the last part I want to talk about is, and I think, Roman, this hits your question, is about what's the supportive context, right? What are the different areas of support that we need? And being very specific about what is specifically needed, who has the authority to make it happen, how important is it to achieving the purpose of the team, or you can think of it as your 3 to 5 priorities. And then when is this resource needed? I wonder if the project that Roman was working on, if he had taken a look at something like this, very clear, this is what's needed by when and by whom and how, perhaps you could get the support that you needed, or being very clear about what the gaps would be. What questions do you have here? Any thoughts? Okay. So when you think about the 6 conditions of team effectiveness and you want an effective team, you need to create the conditions for team success. And so when I talked about the leadership team, that those SVPs from the multiple acquisitions, the game changer that became for them was the team norms, right? Being able to crystallize what they needed to do together, and they haven't looked back, right? Because all of a sudden they started working together and communicating together and holding each other accountable for the agreements that they've made. So now we're going to go into breakout rooms, let's say about 3 or 4 people for about 10 minutes. I'd love for you to think about what's your biggest takeaway and what one thing you're going to try, in the next, couple weeks coming out of this. All right. Sarah, can you help me with that?
Yeah, you're gonna need to make my other account the host.
Okay, I can.
I mean, you might be able to do it from your end because I think you are the.
I'll do it right now.
You're the host as well. Yeah, if you don't mind.
Yeah, everyone was excited. Everyone was excited about kind of getting to like the why of the teams, and the mission, like kind of why what we're all doing. Like how and when should we be assessing this, and also what are the indicators that like maybe things aren't going as planned? That was something that we talked about as kind of a question, and love your perspectives.
Yeah, so I think the indicator of things not going as planned is going back to that slide of hearing things like we can't make a decision, or we can't get things done, or folks won't contribute. It's that those symptoms that there's an underlying problem. And then what was your second part of the question?
How do you diagnose the cause, though, of the symptom?
That's it.
Is one of the questions that we discussed.
So I would go through those, 6 conditions and try to evaluate if you have them, right? Is it clear, that you have a real team? Is the work interdependent? Do you know who's on the team and who's not on the team? Do you have the diverse perspectives? Are people working together? Do you have the right people? Is there a compelling purpose? And is it clear what success looks like? A lot of times people don't know what success looks like. I can remember working, Nicholas was talking about, revenue numbers. I remember working at American Express, where as running a marketing department, my number was actually the number of the entire business unit. And so I didn't actually know what I was responsible for. Like, what did success look like? That meant nothing really to me. Right. And so what does success look like for your team if you're firing on all cylinders, to use Amy's words? Does everyone know what those priorities are? And do they have the right support, going back to what Roman said, to help people be able to achieve those priorities? If those things aren't in place, then you're going to have a problem.
Well, there's an interesting book. It's called 5 Dysfunctions of Teams, which I'm sure you're familiar with. What I like about, and I haven't actually read it, my client actually shared it with me because she views it as like a really great way to say, you know what, these are the 5 reasons why teams aren't working. Accountability, clarity on purpose. I don't know what the other 3 are. I just read the summary today. But I thought, that's actually a great way to frame that conversation. Like, which of these is not working for us, or which, 2 or 3 of these, and then be able to try to come up with the solve. I think the one thing I find interesting is, and actually I came up in our breakout, is this is actually probably something that's worth doing once a month, or when someone new comes on the team, just as a good reminder even of purpose and goals and etc. Because sometimes you just end up sort of so focused on the tactical
Yeah, I mean, certainly when someone comes on the team, to make sure that they know what the team's purpose is and what their role is. And there's a lot of research. You know, I mentioned that HPR article that I co-wrote last week. Gen Z in particular and younger millennials, they want to know what their purpose is in the organization. So we're talking about teams, but they want to know how does their role impact the team and how does it impact the organization and the customers. So as your organization, you know, starts to skew younger in different demographics, the workers are going to hold you to this. You know, what does our work mean? Patrick Lencioni's book, it's a great book. I've read it. The study that I'm talking about is actually Dr. Ruth Wagerman has a book around the 6 conditions of team effectiveness. The team diagnostic survey, it's excellent. And that's one thing I use as a team coach to administer to teams so they can actually fill it out, and then we can diagnose. It's kind of like, it's like a checkup. Where do you have gaps? And then create experiences to help the team become more effective.
And so Wagerman is the name?
Mm-hmm. I think I have the book over here. Hold on. Senior leadership teams, it talks about the 6 conditions of team effectiveness by Ruth Wagerman. It's called the Team Diagnostic Survey. That's what I'm talking about. There's a lot of overlap with Patrick Lencioni's book. I mean, everyone has their like own snazzy marketing way. I mean, I'm a marketing grad from Kellogg. I got it, you know?
Yeah.
I'm not hating on it, but it's the same stuff, right? And so if you feel like you can't be empowered to get a consultant from the Table Group or, you know, someone who follows Ruth Wagerman or whatnot, you can try to self-diagnose some of these things in your own team. As I mentioned, I'm also offering 25-minute one-on-one coaching sessions.
Awesome.
If you would schedule with me between now and the 17th. You don't have to have the meeting with me between now and the 17th, just schedule it. So that way, as I mentioned, for the rest of my life, you can't be like, hey, remember we were on that Kathryn call? But I want to help you. And so let's think about bring a topic that has meaning for you, and let's dig a little bit deeper and see if we can create some clarity for you on it.
That's great. Oh, here we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. He's a great Vanna.
Oh, that's great. Wow, that's lovely. You can just schedule it right then.
Yeah.
With that link. Great.
Yes. What other questions do we have? How else can I be helpful?
How do you work with your clients? Like, are you on an ongoing basis, or do you kind of just swoop in and as a SWAT team and then check in with them every 3 to 6 months?
It really just depends on the team. Typically, I'll meet with the team leader, and the team leader has a hypothesis of what's going on in the team.
Yep.
And then I'll create some type of experience for the team and try to diagnose where the team's at.
Okay.
And then after that point, come up with a series of recommendations. So it really just depends.
Okay.
It's typical to bring in a team coach as a new leader. So I wrote an article on my LinkedIn page about, you know, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt about coming on as a new leader that the team can feel, because usually in the first 3 to 6 months, all that stuff, I call it FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, is just miscommunication, trying to calibrate with you as the new leader. I see some heads nodding. You know, what do they mean? What did they mean exactly? So it really is, everything is bespoke and what fits your needs as a team perspective.
Okay.
What other questions do you have?
How does the Zoom world affect any of what we've talked about?
I think the research has said that people feel more disconnected. It's harder, particularly for junior staff, to get the type of mentoring and support that might have had just by being in the office, right? But also a lot of folks that were, historically or traditionally marginalized feel more equalized. So one of the things that I do coaching for senior women to help them get a voice at the table. And one thing they've said is that Zoom has helped equalize that, because now everyone's just one of the Brady Bunch boxes, right?
Oh, interesting. So it's not all bad.
It's not all bad, because, and also, you're not, maybe facing some of the microaggressions that you might have when you go to work.
Yeah.
Zarek, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think there's a flip side to that though. Like it works if everybody's on an equal playing field, but like speaking from experience, if the team is distributed and you have kind of like like centers of power, so to speak, in a larger organization that are in one location, and then folks that are in another location, or maybe some that are like fully remote, and it's sort of this, not to go back to the word I used earlier, but hodgepodge of scenarios. I mean, that can actually be, like, I would say, hugely detrimental, because some people feel that they've got an advantage. Other people, even if they don't necessarily have a disadvantage, they might just psychologically feel like they're missing out, even if they're not. And it kind of pushes these feelings of imposter syndrome. So I mean, no, I'm not answering your question. I'm just sort of sharing my experience. Like, I think, in my opinion, Zoom works really well when it's truly like everybody's on Zoom, and like if it's a sort of like hybrid model, in the sense you have some people on Zoom, some people in person, like some people it's I don't know, maybe people have found a way to make it work, but in my experience, it was very choppy. And that's coming from perspective of a leader, who inherited a team. It was very
Right.
difficult. So
I think I do love, I think you and Nicholas have the same, when you come on board and you're inheriting a team in this environment, that's got to be quite difficult.
Yeah, I echo that, Zark. Like, my company used to be headquartered in New York City. Everybody moved to New York City prior to the pandemic. They went 100% remote. So even though technically I could live everywhere, like there's still a large contingency of the executive team, director and above, like leadership team, all headquartered in New York City. So it's like, I didn't move to New York City only because of that, but like that was definitely part of the rationale, because now we all just met up in New York City where only one person has to fly in now. And so I feel like that type of meeting, or like availability to be able to meet in person, I think is important, versus in the depths of the pandemic when everyone's remote. Like, it truly didn't matter. I think it'll, at least for me being new and kind of in this like new world of like, it's 100% remote, but we still do in-person meetings at least once a quarter. It's nice to have an option to get FaceTime and like around where the leaders, because I live in New York City essentially.
But there is data to support that, Nicholas. It's called the recency bias, and there's all kinds of articles about it, that if you're around more and they see you more, you're just top of mind more. And those colleagues that are remote are at a disadvantage.
I think it's particularly disadvantageous to new employees who join a team where informal relationships are important. 9 months ago, my team that I lead was moved under the IT department. And so I have a dozen new peers who I don't necessarily work directly with, but who it would be nice to develop relationships with. There are 2 others who come into the office on a weekly basis, and I've been able to develop relationships with them because I'm in the office. The other 9 or so, there's just no way to do it.
Very challenging.
Yeah.
Well, I think it inherently like leads to like that aspect of it inherently leads to like kind of in-group, out-group types of situations.
Yeah. Absolutely. And people are at the perception that you're playing favorites.
Right.
Which you may not mean to be playing favorites, right? It's not intentional, but like you literally see Connie every day. So you think about the big project, you're going to give it to Connie.
Right. There's an
Mine's right
ease,
there.
like friction has been removed
Yeah.
in that scenario.
Yeah, let me run an idea by you.
Yeah. And I think you're also more likely to voice things that are still being formulated and ideas or brainstorming more informally versus if you have to schedule a Zoom call, all of a sudden it becomes another meeting to prepare for versus casual setting, I think can lend itself to some of the, I'm formulating an idea, but I want to vet it a little bit before I go too far down a rabbit hole. And I'm not sure I would do that if I had to call and set up a Zoom call.
Yeah, and so you have to think about what are the ways to create that informal communication.
That water cooler effect.
Formalizing informal communication.
Yeah.
So when I know we're right at 7 o'clock. Zara, good point about the pre-remote, pre-return to office days gives you another edge as well. So this whole pandemic and it's really changed the way we've worked, but I don't want to be cliche and talk more about that. But I will encourage you all to take me up on my offer. I'll send you all a note next week again with the link. And you know, like I said, I'm gifting you all that time, and feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Hope to see you at next event.
This was great.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Kathryn.
Thank you so much.
you.
This was great.
Kathryn. Have a good night, everybody.
Catherine.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.